Close your eyes for a second, not to see, but to feel. Picture a forest path, sunlight dappling through leaves, the smell of pine and damp earth. But there's something else here today. A wait, a silence that's not peaceful, it's holding its breath. Like the trees themselves are witnesses to something they can't forget. For years, that kind of silence followed his name, Gary Hilton. It echoed down trails in Georgia, North Carolina, Florida, places meant for life, for peace. He turned them into something else, a drifter, a ghost story made terrifyingly real, the boogeyman with a face, a name, and a chilling pattern, the monster who hunted hikers. And when they caught him, relief, horror, anger, justice, maybe, case closed. Another evil man locked away, right? The story felt finished, monstrous, but simple. But what if the real chill of Gary Hilton's story didn't end with the handcuffs? What if the most unsettling part, the part that forces us to squirm, came after, not in the screams, but in the silence he chose to break? What if the true darkness lay in what he said, calmly, coldly, once the killing was done? This isn't just about the horrors he committed. It's about the horrifyingly complex, calculated truth he forced into the light. A confession that didn't bring peace. It brought questions that cut far deeper than we ever expected. Questions that make us rethink everything we thought we knew about a monster, and the echoes he left behind in those silent, heavy woods. We need to start here, with them, because this story, as much as it's about the darkness that followed, is ultimately about the light that was stolen. Meredith Emerson, 24 years old, smart, vibrant, an avid hiker. She went out on New Year's Day, 2008, on the trails near Blood Mountain in Georgia. She loved the outdoors. It was her peace. She never came home. Cheryl Dunlap, 46, a nurse, a mother, disappeared while hiking in Florida's Apalachicola National Forest in December 2007. She knew those woods. They were part of her. She vanished without a trace, leaving behind a life, a family, an unbearable silence. Irene and John Bryant, in their 80s, retired, enjoying the autumn of their lives together. They went for a walk on a trail in the Pisgah National Forest, North Carolina, in October 2007, a simple, quiet activity for a couple who had shared decades. They, too, were taken. Their names: Meredith, Cheryl, Irene, John. Say them, remember them, not just victims, but people with families who loved them, friends who cherished them, lives full of promise and quiet moments, all brutally cut short, in places that were supposed to be sanctuaries, hiking trails, national forests, places people go to breathe fresh air, find quiet, feel connected to something bigger than themselves. These places became, instead, scenes of unimaginable terror. Gary Hilton wasn't just a killer who happened to be in the woods. He wasn't someone who snapped in a moment of rage. He was something else entirely. He was a predator. And the wilderness? That was his hunting ground. He understood it. He moved through it. He used its vastness, its solitude, its very beauty, as camouflage for something monstrous. Think about that for a moment. He deliberately sought out people who were alone, vulnerable, immersed in nature. People like Meredith, Cheryl, Irene, and John. People seeking peace, exercise, maybe just a quiet moment with the trees. He watched. He waited. He chose. He used the isolation of the trail, the trusting nature of fellow hikers, against them. The forest wasn't just a backdrop. It was his weapon, his trap. He turned places of refuge into places of profound danger. The fear he sparked wasn't abstract. It was real, palpable. You could feel it in the communities near those forests. In Georgia, in North Carolina, in Florida, news reports carried grim details. Search parties combed the dense undergrowth. Missing posters went up everywhere, faces smiling out, oblivious to the horror that awaited them. Suddenly, that favorite trail didn't feel so welcoming. That rustle in the bushes wasn't just a squirrel. That sense of freedom you felt under the open sky? Tainted. People stopped hiking alone. They bought pepper spray. They told friends exactly where they were going and when they'd be back. They looked over their shoulders. Constantly, he became the shadow on the path, the figure glimpsed just out of sight. The reason parents held their children tighter near the trailhead. He tapped into a deep, primal fear, the vulnerability of being alone in the wild, the dread that someone, something, is watching you from the trees. He wasn't just a boogeyman. For a terrifying stretch of time, he was the boogeyman, the one everyone whispered about. The face on the news that confirmed your worst fears were real. The relief when he was finally caught, it was immense. It was like a collective exhale held for far too long. January 2008. The capture of Gary Hilton in Georgia, directly linked to Meredith Emerson's murder. Finally, the shadow had a face, a name, and he was in handcuffs. The immediate, visceral reaction was, they got him. It's over. The monster was caged. The nightmare, people hoped, could finally begin to fade. There was a profound sense of justice being served, or at least, the path to justice finally opening up. He quickly became the embodiment of every trailside nightmare. The name Gary Hilton became shorthand for the terrifying possibility lurking in what should be peaceful places. He was the reason for the new caution, the lingering unease. He proved that the deepest darkness wasn't always hidden in urban alleys. It could walk the sun-dappled paths of a national forest. He shattered the illusion of safety in nature's embrace. We learned the grim details. How he operated. The violence was shocking, brutal. Meredith Emerson fought bravely for days, a testament to her spirit even in the face of pure evil. Ultimately, Hilton admitted, it was a blow to her head that ended her life. Cheryl Dunlap's remains were found months later, a devastating discovery for her loved ones, made by searchers following her own dogs. The Bryants, an elderly couple simply out for a walk, were killed execution style. The sheer callousness, the calculated nature of taking lives in such serene settings, defied understanding. The impact on the families is beyond comprehension. Grief doesn't cover it. It's a chasm of loss. A constant, agonizing absence. Holidays, birthdays, ordinary Tuesdays, all forever marked by the person who should be there and isn't. The questions that will never have satisfying answers. The whys that echo in the silence. Their lives were reduced to crime scene photos, court testimony, and headlines about a monster. But they were so much more. They are so much more in the memories of those who loved them. Gary Hilton, during this reign of terror, was the shadow that fell across the forest floor. He turned places of life into places of death. He instilled a fear that changed how people interacted with the natural world. He took beloved daughters, mothers, wives, husbands. He became the very definition of the predator we fear might be waiting around the next bend in the trail. His capture brought a necessary end to the immediate threat, a crucial step, but it didn't bring back Meredith, Cheryl, Irene, or John. It didn't erase the terror he inflicted on communities. It didn't heal the wounds. It simply meant the shadow was no longer moving freely through the woods. The darkness he cast, however, lingered long after the handcuffs clicked shut. The peace of the forest, for many, was irrevocably shattered. Gary Hilton was caught. The shadow was in the light, handcuffed, facing the consequences for Meredith Emerson's murder in Georgia. The immediate reaction, understandably, was a wave of relief. Finally, justice could begin. The fear could start to recede. Case closed, right? Then, he started talking, and that's where the story took a sharp, deeply unsettling turn. Because Gary Hilton didn't clam up. He didn't deny. He didn't rage. Shockingly, he confessed. And he didn't just confess a little. He confessed extensively. He talked for hours. He gave details grim, horrifying details about the crimes they already knew he'd committed. About Meredith Emerson. About Cheryl Dunlap. About John and Irene Bryant. But it didn't stop there. He kept going. He started confessing to crimes investigators didn't know about. Crimes in other places. Other states. Suddenly, this wasn't just about Georgia or Florida or North Carolina anymore. The map of his terror was potentially much larger, drawn in his own chilling words. He was filling in the blanks on a map of horror only he fully knew. Now, you might expect a confession like this to come wrapped in something recognizable. Remorse, maybe. Tears, a desperate plea for forgiveness. However hollow. A show of shame, however fake. The performative grief of a caught predator trying to look human. That's the script we've seen before. Gary Hilton threw that script away. His confession was none of that. It was cold, bone-chillingly cold, detached. It was clinical, like a mechanic describing how he fixed a broken engine. He recounted the most brutal acts, abduction, violence, murder with a flat, almost matter-of-fact tone. He gave locations, timelines, methods. He described scenes with a horrifying level of detail, but utterly devoid of feeling. No flicker of sadness, No hint of anger. Just facts. Gruesome, terrifying facts, delivered like he was reading a grocery list. He wasn't screaming the monster. He was calmly mapping it, step by step, crime by crime, and perhaps the strangest part, he seemed cooperative, willing, almost eager, in that detached way, to lay it all out, to point investigators to bodies, to confirm suspicions, to connect dots across state lines that law enforcement hadn't even connected yet. It wasn't a fight. It felt like a grim, voluntary debriefing. This wasn't the raging beast cornered. It was something else entirely, something far more perplexing. This jarring disconnect, this monstrous man calmly cataloging his monstrosities, stopped everyone cold. Cops, prosecutors, reporters, the public. Anyone who heard about it felt that same unsettling jolt. It defied expectation. It short-circuited our understanding of how a human being, even a profoundly evil one, should react to facing the consequences of such acts. Where was the defiance? The breakdown? The anything resembling recognizable human emotion about taking human lives? Instead, there was just cold clarity, and silence where the emotion should have been. So, the immediate, unavoidable question slammed into everyone. Why? What game was Gary Hilton playing? Why talk at all? Why spill so much, so calmly, about so many terrible things? The theories started flying. Maybe he was trying to seem smarter than everyone else, showing off his meticulous planning, his ability to evade capture for so long, a twisted boast wrapped in a confession. Look how clever I was. Look what I got away with. Maybe it was control, in custody, stripped of his freedom, his ability to hunt. This was the one thing he still controlled. The narrative, the information. By confessing on his terms, revealing what he wanted, when he wanted, he was still pulling the strings. Even from a jail cell, he dictated the pace and the scope of the horror revealed. Or, the darkest, most cynical thought. Maybe it was purely strategic? A calculated move. A trade. He knew the stakes. He knew Georgia had the death penalty for Meredith Emerson's murder. He knew Florida had it too for Cheryl Dunlap. By confessing to multiple murders across multiple jurisdictions, he was creating a complex legal web. Suddenly, prosecutors in different states had to talk to each other. They had to figure out who got him first, who could deliver the ultimate punishment. He was introducing chaos, potentially pitting states against each other in a grim race for justice. Was he hoping that by giving them more than they bargained for, he could create leverage? Could he trade detailed confessions, the truth families desperately craved, for the chance to avoid the needle? Was this cold recitation of facts actually a carefully played card in a deadly game of self-preservation? It was a head-scratcher, a genuine puzzle wrapped in horror, because none of the usual motivations seemed to fit neatly. Remorse? Clearly absent. Fear? He didn't show it. A sudden attack of conscience? Impossible to believe from someone recounting murder with the emotional weight of describing the weather. His calmness wasn't reassuring. It was terrifying in a whole new way. It suggested a mind operating on a level we struggle to comprehend, a mind where the taking of human life wasn't a source of overwhelming guilt or rage, but simply data, information to be organized and presented. It forced everyone to confront an uncomfortable possibility, that true evil might not always roar and snarl. Sometimes, it might just speak in a quiet, chillingly normal monotone, laying out the blueprint of its atrocities with the dispassion of an accountant. This unexpected turn, this flood of cold confession, didn't bring closure. It deepened the mystery around Gary Hilton himself. It transformed him from a simple, hateful monster into something far more complex and disturbing, a calculating enigma who, even in defeat, controlled the narrative in the most unsettling way possible. By talking, by confessing so clinically, he wasn't just admitting guilt. He was forcing the world to look directly into an abyss of detachment that felt profoundly alien. And the question echoing louder than ever was, why open his mouth at all? What was going on inside that chillingly calm mind? The confession wasn't an end. It was the beginning of a much more complicated and much more disturbing chapter. Gary Hilton confessed, coldly, clinically, to multiple murders. It was horrifying, yes, but something else started happening as investigators, lawyers, and even the public absorbed the sheer volume and detail of what he was saying. That initial, instinctive label, pure evil, monster, began to feel shaky, inadequate, like trying to describe a hurricane by just calling it windy. His confessions, grim as they were, forced everyone to look deeper. They didn't just confirm the horror, they revealed unsettling layers underneath. Layers that challenged the simple, terrifyingly comforting narrative of the lone, rabid psychopath we thought we understood. First, there was the sheer method laid bare. Listening to Hilton describe his actions wasn't just hearing about violence. It was like being walked through a horrifyingly efficient, step-by-step process. The selection of victims, often alone, appearing vulnerable in remote areas. The approach, sometimes feigning needing help, sometimes just ambush. The control, using restraints. Isolation, the geography of the wilderness itself. The disposal of evidence and bodies, planned. Often involving moving remains across state lines. This wasn't random rage or a sudden snap. This was calculated, precise, almost procedural. He described logistics, the types of tools he used, the vehicles he drove, the routes he took, the time frames involved, with a chilling clarity. It revealed a mind that operated with terrifying rationality while committing unspeakable acts. He wasn't a chaotic storm of evil. He was a cold, calculating engine of it. That realization was profoundly disturbing. Evil wasn't just wild and bestial. It could be meticulous, organized, frighteningly competent. Then came the investigative impact. Hilton's detailed confessions acted like a harsh, revealing light shone on previous investigations. Suddenly, gaps became glaringly obvious. Cases that seemed isolated, maybe unsolvable, were violently yanked together by his words. He didn't just admit to known crimes. He connected dots investigators hadn't even seen. He pointed to locations, described victims they hadn't yet linked to him, explained how he evaded capture in specific instances. Think about Cheryl Dunlap's case in Florida. Her disappearance had been a mystery, a devastating open wound. Hilton's confession provided the gruesome closure. Yes, but it also implicitly highlighted how a predator could operate across vast distances, slipping through jurisdictional cracks. His calm recounting of moving between states, targeting victims in different national forests, exposed how easily a mobile killer could exploit the fragmented nature of local law enforcement. His confessions weren't just admissions. They were unwitting audits of the system's blind spots. Similarly, the murders of Irene and John Bryant in North Carolina gained a horrifying context. Hilton's detailed account showed this wasn't just a one-off act of brutality against an elderly couple. It was part of a pattern, a modus operandi applied ruthlessly, regardless of the victim's age or circumstance. His confessions forced agencies to talk, to share information they might have otherwise kept siloed. He became the grotesque thread stitching together a tapestry of terror across state lines. This painted a picture far more complex than the lone wolf image initially projected. Yes, he acted alone in the actual killings, but his confessions revealed a level of premeditation, of logistical planning, of understanding systems, both natural and bureaucratic, that suggested something beyond a simple, isolated madman. He navigated the modern world using highways, stores, public lands with a predatory purpose. He wasn't a wild animal lurking outside society. He was a predator moving through it, using its infrastructure for his horrific ends. The lone wolf label suddenly felt too small, too neat, for the scope of his calculated operations. Now, this isn't about feeling sympathy for Gary Hilton. Not at all. Understanding is not excusing. The acts he described remain monstrous, unforgivable. The pain he caused is immeasurable. But his confessions forced an uncomfortable realization. True, profound evil doesn't always wear the expected face of raving madness. Sometimes, it wears the mask of chilling rationality. It can plan. It can adapt. It can exploit weaknesses in the system. It can be terrifyingly, disturbingly sane in its execution. That's the unsettling nuance. We're comfortable, in a way, with the idea of the insane killer. It's other. It's a force of nature we can't comprehend. So we lock it away. But Hilton's calm, detailed confessions shattered that comfort. He forced us to confront the possibility that evil can reside in a mind that thinks, that plans, that calculates with cold efficiency, a mind that understands cause and effect, logistics, and consequences, and chooses horror anyway. It makes the evil somehow colder, more insidious, because it suggests a conscious choice, made repeatedly, with clear intent and method, not a loss of control, but a deliberate exertion of control over others for the most horrific purpose imaginable. It removes the easy cushion of madness and forces us to look directly at the abyss of human choice and capability. His confessions didn't just give facts. They forced a paradigm shift. They made investigators reconsider how they track mobile predators. They made courts grapple with the complexities of multi-state jurisdiction in serial crimes. And they forced the public to confront a deeply uncomfortable truth: that the capacity for monstrous acts can coexist with a chillingly rational, functional mind. The monster wasn't just in the dark woods. The monster had a map, a plan, and a calm, horrifyingly logical voice explaining it all. That's the unsettling narrative nuance Gary Hilton's confessions etched into this already dark story, the terrifying face of rational evil. So, Gary Hilton confessed, coldly, thoroughly, to murders across multiple states. He gave investigators grim details, pointed them to bodies, connected crimes they hadn't solved. For the families of Cheryl Dunlap in Florida and Irene and John Bryant in North Carolina, his words brought a horrific kind of closure, answers they desperately needed. However awful, the truth, however brutal, it was finally out there. But here comes the gut punch, the part that leaves a sour taste, a knot in the stomach, the ethical quagmire his confession plunged everyone into. Because Gary Hilton didn't confess out of the goodness of his heart. There was no goodness there. He wasn't suddenly burdened by guilt. His cooperation wasn't driven by remorse. Look at what happened next in the courts. In Florida, charged with the murder of Cheryl Dunlap, Hilton pleaded guilty. The result? He avoided the death penalty. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. No execution chamber. No lethal injection. Life, yes, but life behind bars, not death. Meanwhile, in Georgia, for the murder of Meredith Emerson, the crime that finally led to his capture, he was sentenced to death. The needle still loomed. See the pattern? Confess extensively in Florida. Avoid Florida's death row. Georgia, where he was caught red-handed, still pushed for and secured the ultimate punishment. This forces a brutal, unavoidable question. Did Gary Hilton use the truth, the raw, awful, painful truth those families deserved and needed, as a bargaining chip? Was his cold, clinical cooperation actually a meticulously calculated strategy for self-preservation? Was he trading detailed confessions for the chance to keep breathing? Think about it. He knew the system. He understood the stakes. By confessing to multiple murders across state lines, he created a complex legal chessboard. Suddenly, prosecutors in Florida, Georgia, and potentially other states were all players. They had to coordinate. They had to decide who goes first, who has the strongest case, who can secure the most severe punishment. For Florida, getting a conviction for Cheryl Dunlap's murder was crucial. Justice for Cheryl, closure for her family. But building a capital case, a death penalty case, is incredibly difficult, time-consuming, and expensive. It requires proving specific, aggravating factors beyond a reasonable doubt. It involves years, sometimes decades, of appeals, forcing families to relive the horror over and over. And there's always the chance it fails. Hilton, sitting in his cell, likely saw this. He saw an opportunity. By offering Florida a guaranteed conviction, a guilty plea, and crucially, by offering them the detailed truth that would bring finality to the Dunlap family, he gave them something incredibly valuable. In return, they took the death penalty off the table. They accepted life without parole. Done. Case closed in Florida. Relatively quickly, Cheryl's family got answers, and Florida got its conviction without the long, brutal slog of a capital trial. Georgia, however, wasn't swayed. They pursued the death penalty for Meredith Emerson and secured it. Hilton remains on Georgia's death row. So, was it a deal? A devil's bargain? On the surface, Florida got what it needed: justice for Cheryl Dunlap, defined as a conviction and the truth for her loved ones. The family got the unbearable details, but also the certainty that he would never walk free from Florida. Hilton got to avoid execution in Florida. But look underneath. Did Florida essentially say, "Give us the truth. Give Cheryl's family the closure they need, and we won't kill you"? Did Hilton, in his chillingly rational way, calculate that spilling the gruesome details was his best, maybe only, shot at dodging the death penalty in at least one jurisdiction? It sure looks like it. It feels like it. His cooperation reeks of strategy, not sincerity. He used the very facts of his atrocities as currency. He traded the location of bodies, the methods of murder, the timelines of terror, things families had a fundamental right to know, for a better chance at survival. He weaponized the truth. This creates an ethical quagmire that's incredibly hard to navigate. On one hand, the families did get answers. Cheryl Dunlap's family knew what happened. The Bryant's family knew. That matters. That has real value for people living with unimaginable loss. Knowing is often marginally better than the torturous limbo of not knowing. Justice, in the form of knowledge and certainty, was served to them. On the other hand, was that knowledge bought with a concession to the killer? Did the system reward his monstrous calculus? By accepting his plea and sparing his life in Florida, did the state essentially validate his strategy? Did it tell him, and killers like him, that detailed confessions can be a get-out-of-death-free card? At least in some places, it forces us to confront a brutal, uncomfortable reality about the justice system, especially when dealing with the worst crimes and the most calculating criminals. Can justice ever feel truly clean, truly complete? When it has to dance with a killer's own self-serving strategy, when the path to the truth, the path to closure for grieving families, winds through a negotiation where the murderer holds valuable information and uses it to barter for his own life. Does that taint the outcome? Does the relief of knowing come mixed with the bitter pill of knowing why you were told? Gary Hilton's confessions gave families pieces of their shattered worlds back. But the way he gave them, the cold calculation behind it, the legal outcome it helped engineer, it leaves a lingering shadow. It makes the justice delivered feel less like a pure victory and more like a grim, morally ambiguous transaction. The truth came, but it came hand in hand with the unsettling realization that the monster, even in chains, was still playing his game. And in Florida, at least, his move, trading awful truths for time, might have worked. That's the devil's bargain at the heart of this dark chapter. So, we circle back to the question that might be hanging in the air. Why? Why dredge this up now? Why revisit Gary Hilton, his horrific crimes, his chilling confessions, and the messy legal aftermath? The case feels closed, right? He's convicted. He's on death row in Georgia. Isn't it better to let the darkness fade? But here's the thing. The Gary Hilton case isn't just a closed chapter of horror, another grim true crime story to file away. It's something more. It's a stark, unsettling lesson etched in pain. Revisiting it isn't about morbid fascination. It's about confronting the uncomfortable truths his story forces upon us. Truths we still grapple with. First, it challenged our deep, almost primal, need for simple monsters. We crave clear villains, figures of pure evil we can easily condemn, lock away, and distance ourselves from. It's comforting. It makes the world feel less threatening. Gary Hilton's calm, detailed confessions shattered that simplicity. He wasn't ranting or raving. He was reasoning, calculating. He forced us to look beyond the easy label and see the terrifying reality that profound evil can wear the mask of chilling rationality. It's not always a wild beast. Sometimes, it's a cold, methodical operator. Understanding that complexity isn't excusing it. It's recognizing its terrifying form, so we might be better equipped to spot it, to understand its patterns, however unsettling that understanding might be. Ignoring that complexity leaves us vulnerable. Second, his case threw a harsh spotlight on how our own systems can sometimes help predators hide. Investigative jurisdictions, state lines, county lines, different police departments, these invisible boundaries fractured the bigger picture. A disappearance in Florida stayed a Florida case. A murder in Georgia was handled by Georgia. A missing elderly couple in North Carolina was North Carolina's concern. Gary Hilton, the drifter, moved freely across these lines. He exploited that fragmentation. His detailed confessions were the brutal glue that finally pieced together his multi-state reign of terror. It exposed a critical weakness without his chilling cooperation. Would the full scope of his crimes ever have been known? How many other predators operate in the gaps between our jurisdictions? His case screams the need for better communication, shared databases, and a more unified approach to tracking predators who see state lines not as barriers, but as opportunities. Third, and perhaps most painfully, Hilton's confessions forced us directly into the messy, morally gray swamp of plea deals and capital punishment. Remember the devil's bargain? Confessing in detail to Cheryl Dunlap's murder in Florida got him life without parole, avoiding their death chamber. Yet, Georgia still sentenced him to die for Meredith Emerson. This forces us to ask hard questions. Can truth for grieving families ever be truly separated from a killer's calculated self-interest when it's offered as part of a deal? Does accepting a plea bargain to secure that truth and avoid a traumatic trial feel like justice? Or does it feel like the system being outmaneuvered by the killer? When states have different laws and different appetites for pursuing the death penalty, does it create a macabre marketplace where killers like Hilton can potentially shop for the best outcome by strategically confessing? There are no easy answers here, only difficult trade-offs and profound ethical discomfort. Hilton's case forces us to stare directly into that discomfort, to acknowledge that justice in the face of such calculated evil is rarely clean, simple, or satisfying. It's often messy, compromised, and leaves a bitter aftertaste, even when it delivers vital truths to families. But perhaps the most unsettling lesson, the one that lingers longest, comes back to the voice. We expect monsters to sound like monsters. We expect rage, defiance, maybe even twisted pride. Gary Hilton gave us none of that. He gave us calm, a flat, almost bored, recitation of horror. His terrifying truths, the locations, the methods, the cold facts of lives extinguished, came packaged not in a scream, but in a dispassionate monotone. That is profoundly disturbing. It shatters our expectations. It tells us that the most terrifying revelations about human darkness might not come from the raging beast, but from the chillingly rational individual calmly explaining the mechanics of evil. It forces us to accept that the capacity for unspeakable acts can coexist with a frighteningly lucid, functional mind. The absence of expected emotion is the horror. So, why rethink Gary Hilton? Why revisit this darkness? Because Meredith Emerson, Cheryl Dunlap, Irene Bryant, and John Bryant deserve more than to be footnotes in a forgotten horror story. Their lives, and their tragic ends, imparted hard lessons, because ignoring the uncomfortable nuances Hilton exposed, the complexity of evil, the flaws in our systems, the moral quicksand of justice, doesn't make them go away. It just leaves us less prepared for the next time, because understanding how a predator like Hilton thought, moved, and exploited weaknesses isn't about empathizing with the monster. It's about building stronger defenses against others who might operate in similar, terrifyingly rational ways. Because confronting the unsettling reality that truth can be weaponized by the guilty forces us to constantly question and refine what justice truly means, especially for the victims and their families. And because recognizing that evil can speak in a calm voice, not a scream, is a crucial, if deeply unpleasant, part of understanding the darkest corners of human nature. We can't protect against what we refuse to see clearly. Revisiting Gary Hilton isn't about dwelling in the darkness for darkness's sake. It's about learning from it. It's about honoring the victims by ensuring their tragedy compels us to ask harder questions, demand better systems, and confront uncomfortable truths. Even when those truths come in the chillingly calm confession of the man who destroyed their light. The woods may be quiet, but the echo of this case? It demands we keep listening and keep thinking. Gary Hilton sits behind bars, on death row in Georgia, life without parole in Florida. His killing spree ended. Justice, in its complex, compromised form, was served, but his cold, clinical voice, that echo lingers. Let's be absolutely clear. His confession didn't redeem him. Nothing could. No amount of detail, no matter how chillingly precise, washes the blood from his hands. Meredith Emerson, Cheryl Dunlap, Irene and John Bryant, their lives, their light, were extinguished by his calculated evil. That horror remains absolute, unforgivable. But his confession, it did something else. Something profound and deeply unsettling. It forced a reckoning. It ripped away the easy comfort of labeling him simply a monster, a psychopath, a figure of pure, incomprehensible evil we could lock away and dismiss. It shoved our faces towards a deeper, darker abyss, the abyss of human capability itself. It forced us to stare into the terrifying reality that evil isn't always a raging inferno. Sometimes, it's ice. It can plan. It can calculate. It can operate with a chilling, detached rationality while committing acts of unimaginable cruelty. Hilton's calm recitation of horror wasn't madness. It was method. It was the blueprint of a predator's mind laid bare. And that's the uncomfortable mirror he held up. It reflects a disturbing truth we often shy away from. Understanding the how and the why, as disturbing, as repulsive as that journey might be, is not optional. It's crucial, not to excuse. Never. Understanding is not absolution. The why behind his choices doesn't lessen the agony he inflicted, doesn't diminish the void he left in countless lives. We seek to understand how he operated, his methods, his patterns, his exploitation of wilderness and jurisdictional gaps, to prevent, to build better defenses, to recognize the signs, however subtle, of a predator moving with purpose through the world, to mend the fractures in our systems that he exploited, to protect the next person seeking peace on a trail. We confront the unsettling why of his calculated confessions, the trade of truth for survival, to refine, to force a harder look at the messy machinery of justice, at the agonizing compromises made in the shadow of capital punishment, at the ethical cost of bargaining with the devil for closure, to demand a system that serves victims first, even when faced with a killer's cold strategy. And through it all, we remember the victims. Their memory is not a footnote in Hilton's grim story. It is the only light that matters in this darkness. Meredith's vibrant spirit, Cheryl's dedication, Irene and John's enduring love, these are paramount. Honoring them means refusing to let their deaths be buried beneath a simplistic narrative. It means carrying forward the unsettling, complex truths their tragedy revealed. Their stolen light demands that we learn, that we question, that we strive to prevent such darkness from finding another foothold. The woods where Hilton hunted might be quiet again. The immediate fear has faded, but the echo of his confession? That flat, chilling voice detailing unspeakable acts with cold precision? That doesn't fade. It resonates. It's a persistent, uncomfortable hum in the background of our understanding. It forces us to keep listening, to resist the urge to turn away from the hard questions, the uncomfortable nuances, the terrifying rationality that evil can sometimes wear. It forces us to keep questioning our assumptions, our systems, our understanding of the darkness humans are capable of, not for Hilton's sake, but for the sake of every life that deserves to walk in the light. Unafraid, the echo demands we stay awake. And that, perhaps, is the most vital, if haunting, legacy of this dark chapter.